Up there. How's it going, people? Good to see you. Oh, good. Tons of sand and whatnot. Um, Boom, welcome back. Or as they say, good afternoon, good day, good evening, good night, good morning, and all that's nonsense. Hope you're all doing well and doing good, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, whatever time it is. Today happens to be here, Thursday, the 6th of November, 2025. And what is happening of consequence right here in Israel and in Gaza, where Israel and Hamas are still at war. There's still a ceasefire technically holding, but there are ongoing things that keep testing that ceasefire, including the ongoing delays in the recovery of all of the bodies of the fallen hostages who have been captured by Hamas and their ilk on October 7th, 2023. And they remain essentially in captivity somewhere in Gaza. And there's still about 7 or 8 hostages yet to be returned, including, I believe, 5 Israelis and 2 foreigners. So, if you don't think that's messed up, I don't know what to tell you, because it's pretty crazy. At the same time, there are some 200 Hamas terrorists reportedly trapped in a tunnel beyond what is known as the Yellow Line, which means areas under Israel's control inside of Gaza. So the reason that this is an issue is because the terrorists, for some reason, think that they should be allowed to just leave, even though their very presence in that area is a violation of the ceasefire. So they are literally in a tunnel underground where they were hiding, and they are in an area that is under control of the IDF, which they are not supposed to be in, according to the ceasefire. And yet there they are, violating the ceasefire. And they expect somehow that the international community will come to their aid and save them from the inevitable end that awaits them if Israel does what Israel should probably do, which is to not let them get away. There have been reports that the IDF flooded them, and all 300 of them now have been flooded to death. Those reports have not been validated. They've not been confirmed. Israel has not acknowledged taking any such actions against these terrorists, despite the fact that they are, in fact, Hamas terrorists. And therefore, Israel has every right to, well, in a field of combat, put an end to those enemy combatants. After all, they're not just enemy combatants, they're enemy combatants in an area in which they are forbidden to be, according to the agreements that the organization, signed. So they should not be there in the first place. And it is the responsibility of Hamas for having sent them there to begin with. And it is a clear violation of the agreement. So what should Israel do? Well, again, I've told you my opinion. This is a violation of the ceasefire agreement. There is really no reason for Israel to excuse this situation and just, be gentle about it. Being gentle about it and allowing these people to come out from being trapped is appeasing an enemy that views appeasement as weakness. These people They don't view appeasement as strength. They don't view kindness as strength. They don't view a humanitarian gesture as strength. When I say these people, I specifically mean the Hamas terrorists and their organization, right? They very specifically view any kind of giving in to humanity, being humane, they view that as weakness. They view that as an opportunity for them to further their goals of takia and, basically, which is essentially hiding and lying and pretending to be something that they're not, and mukawama, which is armed resistance, aka terrorism, because their version of armed resistance includes targeting innocent people that have nothing to do with the conflict, targeting non-combatants, which is strictly prohibited, and yet that's exactly their strategy. So their strategy, their very strategy, not just their tactics, but their actual strategy is a violation of armed conflict treaties. But they don't care because that's their strategy. So that's why I say, again and again, that giving these people a quarter, letting them essentially get away, as unfair as it may seem, is a bad decision. And I say as unfair as it may seem for those of you who wish that they would be spared. Sparing them will not help Israel recover any of its dead hostages that are trapped in Gaza still. Sparing them will not convince the people of Gaza to like Israel more. Sparing them will not cause the Hamas to give up their weapons faster. Sparing them will not cause the Hamas to give up their power in Gaza faster. Sparing them will only embolden the Hamas, who will view it as a strategic win, and they will attempt to repeat such things again. By the way, those tunnels are not just filled with hundreds of Hamas terrorists at the moment in that one place, who are laying in wait to attack IDF soldiers, by the way. No, those tunnels are chock full of weapons. There are tons and tons of weapons in those places. I mean, literally tons and tons of weapons. I don't know if you've ever been to any of these places. Probably not. Especially if you're watching my YouTube channel in English and you're overseas. Chances are you're not an IDF soldier and have never been before. And you've not been, hopefully, in Hamas. So you have not seen these tunnels from the inside in any way, shape, or form. And hopefully you're not one of the people who was ever a hostage taken to those tunnels. But those tunnels have been filled with weapons over the decades. There is no shortage of weapons in those areas. Like, they are packed in some places, like, significantly. It is, in other words, it sometimes takes not just a couple of people to move the weapons out of the way and clear them out. It sometimes takes a significant amount of resources just to empty the weapons caches found in certain locations. It's kind of crazy. And sometimes there's just so many that the easiest thing to do is really blow them up on the spot. And that's one of the many reasons that, blows up the weapons caches that it finds in the tunnels themselves. Sometimes they, do collect the weapons, or sometimes they do blow them up. Especially if the weapons they find are, in fact, like things like explosives, right? It's like, well, you may as well blow up the explosives because you're going to blow up the tunnel anyway. So use their own arsenal against them, since Israel is not going to use those usually, questionable quality weapons in some cases. Many of them are high quality weapons, but a lot of them are not. So the thing to do is to basically look for entrances to these places, which they find significantly all over the place. Send in the robots to try to clear out whatever might be in there. And they sometimes send in dogs first before they send in people, and then they send in people after that. It's kind of the process, right? It's been established over the years because it tends to reduce the number of casualties, at least from the Israeli side, since we don't have to send in soldiers first. We can send in robots, make sure everything's clear as much as possible, and then, dogs to sniff out anything else. The problem with the robots, right, is that sometimes the robots miss things because they're not humans after all, and the people operating the robots may not be able to see every little thing. The robots also may not trigger certain things that an animal or a person might, and that makes for the robots to do the job of an animal or a person. Nevertheless, there's always the effort, and that's good. But ultimately, you need people, you need boots on the ground to verify that things are cleared, and more importantly, to lay the explosives that will detonate the tunnels themselves, which is something they do. So often what happens if the tunnels are big enough is they will literally not actually blow up the tunnel from the inside, like by going into the tunnel, but they will do, they will drill like a big hole into it from above, and then they will drop dynamite or whatever. They're going to blow it up with C4 or something like that into the tunnel, and they do that at many points along the tunnel's length, and then they ignite the charge and essentially blow it up, right? So they pack the explosives in, but they do it by drilling in from above. That's when there's a tunnel where there's the potential, a high potential of risk if the soldiers enter. So instead of entering the, the deeper depths of the tunnel, they just check that where the tunnel still is, using robots and whatever cameras, etc., to see where it's going. So they just drill tunnels along the length of the, and that's why when you see, like, for example, the videos of the explosions of the tunnel, you'll see like a long line of smoke, which is the tunnel being blown up. And then you'll see a few what look like geysers of smoke, plumes of smoke shooting out from the ground at very specific locations, and they have very specific shapes. They look like little, like all the smoke coming out of the ground has a very similar shape and pattern in each of the explosions, because the method they're using for making the hole and the amount that they're packing in each hole obviously will depend from tunnel to tunnel, but in each tunnel will have its own signature, usually, especially if it's done by one crew, right, or two crews that have the same technical settings for what they're doing. So that's one of the many ways that Israel gets rid of the tunnels. Basically, right? One of the most, it's a very basic way, but it's a very effective way, because it means that Israel can basically blow up the tunnels without having to actually send in troops to lay the dynamite. Now, there are cases where we don't really have a choice, and we do have to send in troops to lay the dynamite, because there is no other way to effectively place the dynamite in the right places. So, in those cases, yes, Israel sends in, frankly, incredibly brave soldiers to go into places that are very, very likely booby-trapped, and or even have, in some cases, Hamas terrorists hiding in wait. Like just sitting around waiting, stocked with provisions to last them days or weeks or months, just to attack whoever might happen upon them. Which may sound crazy to you, but if it sounds crazy to you, you're probably not a member of Hamas. They do crazy things all the time. That is par for their course, so to speak. Right? That's totally normal behavior for them. They do crazy things, not for good. Right? Yes, there's plenty of Israeli soldiers who do crazy things too, but generally that's because they are driven by a good mission, and they have to be brave and courageous to get those things done. And you could say, well, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, or the other way around. Again, the difference between Israel and Hamas is that Israel does not intentionally, and that's a very key word, does not intentionally target civilians, right? When Israelis shoot at a target, yeah, that's been officially approved, that official approval has not just gone through whoever the commanding officer is on the scene, right? It's gone through the commanding officer on the scene. It's gone through the commanding officer usually at the base, or for the field of the area of operation, and then it's gone to the commander, who deals with the liaison office to the legal office, and then it goes to the lawyers themselves at the legal office, right? And then they have to approve it. Ultimately, these things have to be approved by lawyers, right? If the lawyers don't approve, the missions don't go ahead. And lawyers have overruled commands that have said, yes, go ahead and eliminate the target. And lawyers have said no. And by the way, commanders below them have also overruled lawyers who gave approval. And then the commander saw something on the ground after the fact and said, no, there's actually people that we didn't think that were there. And this diminishes the value of the hit in terms of it causes too much of a high risk to innocent people. Therefore, we're canceling it. Right? And there have been many cases, even recorded on video and published and all that, but even obviously many others as well, where commanders in the field have told soldiers, yeah, don't do that. Even though we have approval to do the hit, you're not striking it now because the conditions on the ground have changed, and we're not going to just attack a bunch of innocent people. So there, we don't, we can't make this hit right now. And that happens a lot. So that is the key difference, right, between the Hamas and the IDF. And I know people will say, what are you talking about? I've seen proof of pictures of Israeli snipers shooting Palestinian babies in the head. I haven't. Okay. There are actually no videos. And you can tell, oh, I've seen tons of videos. Really? Show me. If you've actually seen a video of an Israeli sniper shooting a Palestinian child in the head on purpose, or even by accident, but on purpose specifically, because that's the claim. Surprise, if a soldier aimed at a target and then accidentally hit a child. It would be awful. It would be very tragic. And I'm sure it's happened. I don't deny that children have died. Obviously, children have died. This is war. Children die in war. And it's one of the worst things about it. It's one of the many reasons people should not engage in war in the first place. But the fact is, Israel does not target innocent children. Right? That's why you cannot actually find a video of it, despite all the claims, despite the millions of cameras that exist in Gaza. Remember, every single person in Gaza have cell phones. Hello there. Hi. Hello. If there was a single incident like that, right, that had been covered, that had actually received media attention, when I say media attention, I mean that had been covered by a person in Gaza, right? If there was actually a video of an actual IDF soldier shooting an actual Palestinian child, you could see him aiming for it and shooting him, that would be something that has not happened yet, if you could show that. But it hasn't happened yet. And I hope it won't happen. But the claims that it has happened and that it always happens regularly is just a lie. There is no evidence of that. Now, there are claims that there is evidence of that, and these claims are often made by supposed human rights activists and human rights organizations. If you notice who these human rights organizations are, they're all organizations that have an anti-Israel bias, right? Like what's it called? Euromed? That's one of the groups that makes this claim all the time. there's no such video, and they are not a very credible organization. I know people like to say they're credible, but they're not, right? Why? Well, look at who runs them. Connect the dots, follow the money. It's not that hard for you to understand why they're not a credible organization. Amnesty International also, when it comes to this conflict, yes, they've done great work around the world, wonderful. When it comes to this particular conflict, they don't. They are anti-Israel. Why would they be anti-Israel compared to all the other? Because in this case, they get to reverse the David and Goliath metaphor. That's why, right? Even though it's not really reversible, and it very much is the way that it was in the original old scripture, except that the people that David faced were different than the people that Israel faced. Even though they try to say, the current ones try to say that they're of shared roots, they're not. Not even close. So that's one of the many reasons, right, that those claims are fake, and we can prove it because there are no such videos that exist anywhere. Right? And anyone that could actually show such a video would have basically a very solid piece of information that tons of media around the world would be gobbling at the chance, biting at the chance to cover. But they don't, because it doesn't exist. Not because they're quietly in favor of it. Like, you're going to tell me every single media, you're going to tell me Al Jazeera is in favor of Israel? Like, really? They are the mouthpiece for Hamas. If such a video existed and anybody had it, they would literally just need to message Al Jazeera, hey, I have this video, and they would be granted an interview that day live on TV. It would not be a question, right? Al Jazeera would put them on in prime time before they even check the facts. They would just put them on. Oh, you have such a video, let's see it, So, that's kind of the point is, people who believe the hype and all the myths against Israel are making massive mistakes in their interpretation of the facts. And that's why when you see things like, 200 Hamas terrorists, or you say, if you like them, you'll say, 200 Hamas gunmen, that's what you call them. Gunmen were murdered by Israel and hiding, while they were hiding in the tunnels, keeping safe in the tunnels. They weren't keeping safe. They were hiding to attack IDF soldiers is what they were doing. Right? That's what they were doing. They weren't hiding there out of the goodness of their heart. They were literally hiding them there in order to attack Israelis and murder them. And maybe you don't understand that because you're thick. I don't know. But that's a fact, Jack. So whatever your thinking is about whatever Israel might or might not be doing, keep that in mind. When you hear claims that Israel has flooded them already, and Israel clearly has not flooded them, or it would be a major story, because not every day the IDF whacks 200 Hamas guys trapped in a tunnel. Question the veracity of claims is what you should do in all cases. Like the old saying goes, those who watch too much news are misinformed, and those who watch no news are underinformed. Your job as a news consumer is to be able to discern between noise and signal when you watch the news. So you need to watch information from both sides of a story. You need to be able to detect what is true and what is not by reading, and usually splitting it somewhere down the middle, being able to discern what is accurate and what's not, and it's not always going to fall directly in the middle, right? It's going to very often lean to one side or the other, because very often one side will be telling more of the truth than the other, especially in a situation like this, where you have one side that's literally a terrorist organization and the other side that is the army of a democratically elected government of a nation state that follows international law, that upholds the Geneva Conventions, that goes above and beyond any requirement within those conventions and treaties in order to preserve life. Right? These are little things you have to consider when you're weighing. And you can tell me, oh, you don't believe this, you don't believe that. Sure, you pick and choose when it's convenient, as opposed to Israel, which is consistent about what it does and what it believes and what values it upholds and which organizations it supports and which ones it doesn't. And by the way, it supports organizations, even those that are against, because it considers them to be important for international legitimacy, whether those countries support Israel or not. For example, the UN. What reason does Israel have to stay in the UN? Think about it. The UN accuses Israel of more crimes and condemns Israel of more crimes than any other country in the world, like all of them combined. It's an insane proposition to suggest that Israel should stay in the UN, and yet it does. Why? Because precisely Israel considers the UN to be important for its own international relations, for its own standing in the world, even though the UN clearly has an anti-Israel bias. So for anyone to say that Israel should condemn the UN and leave it, when you realize that they haven't, could be an indication to you that Israel plays by the rules. Its enemies that quite literally not only are not members of the UN because they don't represent a member state, but they violate the rules by default because they are not signatories to any of those rules that all nation states are a party to, like the Geneva Conventions, etc. And yes, there are many different kinds of treaties and international laws of war and whatever. And you can argue with me the meaningfulness or insignificance of those treaties all day long, and I won't say that you're wrong, because it's true that many international laws are basically a joke, right? And by basically a joke, I mean, well, they have no teeth, right? Metaphorically, they have no teeth. Why? Because they're international agreements. So by definition, they are without merit. They are without enforceability most of the time, right? They don't have a structure by which to enforce those rules in most cases. Sometimes they have a little bit of a structure when the case is so significant that something like the United States and or the UK and or other allies decide, no, that's it, we have to put an end to this action because we consider it beyond the pale. Okay, and in those cases you will sometimes have, a situation like what happened in Kosovo, along with some allies, to separate the fighting forces back in the 1990s, to implement some kind of eventually peace agreement, which took a lot of effort, but it happened, right? And most of the time, it doesn't happen like that. Most of the time, what happens is basically nothing, right? International agreements are not very enforceable. Nevertheless, international treaties and conventions of war are considered very important, and they are considered some kind of standard of rules of warfare. And the fact that you have actors like the Hamas terrorist organization not adhering to them kind of tells you everything. Just walked by one of those signs for a former hostage who was released alive and was welcoming him back. And they have this like big sign up. Anyway, so yeah, so that is kind of the status update on this crazy war that's been happening, and the current situation with the terrorists stuck in the tunnel. Once again, some 200 Hamas terrorists are stuck in a tunnel on the Israeli side of the yellow line in Gaza, which is the line of control, right? The yellow line is the line that separates between Israeli control and Hamas control. So there are Hamas terrorists inside of the Israeli part of Gaza. You know, the part of Gaza that is controlled by Israel at the moment, but by the IDF specifically. They're trapped there. The IDF knows their location. And, you know, you don't play with your food when you catch it. If you're fishing, right? You don't play with it. Don't be cruel. You end it quickly. And that's what they should do when it comes to dealing with terrorists who operate with the mentality of anything they see as a humane gesture, they view as an act of weakness and an opportunity to take advantage of, and an opportunity to strike again at those who are kind to them. Well, that kind of spells out what should happen to them, because if Israel takes them captive, then Israel has to jail them, try them, imprison them, house them, feed them, give them all the rights, give them all the privileges of being a prisoner in an Israeli prison, and all for what? So that the Hamas can try to attack Israel again, kidnap more people again in the future, and then guys released when they were literally violating a ceasefire? Doesn't sound like a good deal to me. Sounds like an opportunity for Israel to get rid of a bunch of terrorists all at once. Now you will say, well, if you do that, you're just going to create more terrorists, which is the most stupid thing anyone can say. Did killing millions of Jews cause the other millions of Jews in Europe during the World War II Holocaust? Did it cause all of us to, you know, all of our, like my parents, or, you know, who went through that period of time, my mother specifically in Europe at that time, did it cause them to become terrorists and just attack Germans everywhere for decades on end? No. So this notion that killing terrorists creates more terrorists is complete nonsense. It does not. What creates them is brainwashing, right? And a lot of it, right? What creates them is propaganda and lies. And you give a person enough of anything when it comes to misinformation, eventually they're going to believe it. I see your comment there. That's what it says. Guy, what? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that is the situation right now with what's happening in those tunnels in Gaza. You know, it's not easy to decide what to do in this situation, because as a human being, you know, I do not relish the thought of the IDF ending the lives of anyone, even though they're our arch enemy, right? Those Hamas terrorists, right? But on the other hand, you have to understand the fact that these people are bent on doing it again and again and again and again, and have said as much many, many, many times over. And to ignore that is to be willfully ignorant when you know these facts. It is to be living in fantasy land, to pretend as if they have some kind of good intentions. They do not. Right? It is to pretend as though they can be dealt with like a normal organization. They cannot. You're living in a fantasy bubble if you think that Israel can just extend the hand of kindness to these 200 people in Hamas and somehow it will just radically change their organization. It will not. They are and still will be a jihadi organization bent on destroying the state of Israel. Well, when you've got literally 200 of them in a tunnel, you know, it's an opportunity for Israel to get rid of 200 terrorists, the way I look at it. Now, it's a very savage thing in the minds of many people. Oh, they're trapped. You should never hunt somebody that's trapped. Well, FAFO. When you're a terrorist, okay, forget terrorists. When you are a member of a combatant force and you are in enemy territory and you get trapped somewhere, you should expect to be captured or killed. And depending on the level of animosity between the two sides, the greater the animosity, the greater the probability you will be killed. Now, that said, Israel is Israel and has a habit of extending a humanitarian hand even to its arch enemies, which is why I will not be surprised if at the end of the day, Israel does not kill these people, but rather accept and arrest them and imprisons them, which, as I said before, includes the very real probability that any of them might be released in the future should Hamas do such a thing again, which is exactly why Hamas has to be destroyed, precisely so that it cannot do such a thing again. I can tell you that if they had been found in such a tunnel before the ceasefire was signed a month ago, roughly, right? More than a few weeks ago now, the Israelis would not have even waited. Right? They would have just probably bombed the tunnel or flooded it or whatever. In all likelihood. But because there's a ceasefire, and as I told you, Hamas is testing the limits of the ceasefire day by day with every little thing that they can, and this is exactly one of those things. That's the situation. That's exactly what they're doing. They are testing the limits of Israel's patience to see how far they can push Israel and the other signatories of the parties, either to trigger Israel into such a massive, overwhelming response that the rest of the world will say, oh, Israel, you've gone too far for these minor violations of the ceasefire, which is not okay to have any violations of the ceasefire. But that's exactly what we predicted. Second of all, because they want to see not just how they can break the will of the ceasefire agreement, but how fast they can regroup, rearm, resupply, retrain, and relaunch their efforts against Israel. Right? That is the whole purpose of them doing this. They don't want to give up power, the Hamas. They're finding every possible excuse to not do it. Because to them, if they give up power, again, it will be an acknowledgement that they have surrendered to Israel, which means they have lost the war, which means they will be the first group since Israel was reestablished as a state, since 1948. They will be the first Arab group to actually admit defeat to Israel. Not just a ceasefire, but actual defeat. And that is something they do not want to do. Right? Hamas does not want to be the first group in the history of armed resistance against the state of Israel, terrorism, or any kind of resistance, even the wars that they launched before, the sort of terrorism and the terrorism before the wars, no group has ever surrendered to any Jewish majority force, Israeli force here in Israel since Israel was reestablished. They've never surrendered in the sense of saying, yes, we admit defeat. No. They've all had ceasefires, they've all had truces. They've never had to actually admit defeat. And that is one of the main problems here. In fact, it's the main problem. Because without that admission of defeat, they can always say, oh, well, we haven't lost yet. We can keep fighting and we can win someday. So they never had to internalize a defeat that they acknowledge as a defeat. They've always had to internalize defeats that they got away with by calling them ceasefires or truces or armistices. And those are not the same thing, right? A proper and true defeat, an unconditional defeat, a defeat where one side says we surrender, not like a few soldiers surrendering to another few soldiers, but the actual head of the military or terrorist force surrendering, saying, yeah, we are actually surrendering, we are giving up our power. That is a very important step in getting to the next stage in which two sides can reconcile. But of course, the jihadis have no intention to ever reconcile in their current. But the thing is, once they surrender, then there's no reason for them not to. Right? They can change their ways. They are human beings. Once they surrender, they have every opportunity to say, you know what? Until now, our mission was to be such and such. And we tried it. We gave it our best shot, but we failed. We fell short of our goal. And now the reality has changed. And now our new goal is to reconcile. For example, they could survive in that way, right? They would still be out of power. They would still not to be need not to be Hamas anymore, because Hamas, like the Nazis after World War II, Hamas must go. Right? Like the Japanese Empire after World War II, Hamas must go. There cannot be any trace of it still in the government in Gaza after this war is over. Now, that doesn't mean that there can't be any former Hamas people in the new government if those former Hamas people give up violence, like renounce violence and agree to live in peace, right? But if they don't, then no, they can't remain in the government. They absolutely have to get out. We can't have Israel beset on all sides forever and a Wednesday by enemies who constantly seek to destroy us. Sorry, that's not a thing. Right? Those people must leave, or they must be left, so to speak. If you know, you know. Right? We can't just have people with weapons or with a desire to have weapons to use against the state of Israel, or with the desire to use violence, period, against the state of Israel, running around unimpeded in Gaza or the West Bank, seeking to just cause chaos, death, and destruction just because they feel like it, when Israel has the ability to stop them. So, no, that's not okay. Like in the United States, would you allow some separatist group to just say, no, we want to have free Western Minnesota or whatever, and they would start becoming extremely violent? What do you think the United States would do if there was some armed terrorist group running around Western Minnesota starting to kill everybody because they want to have a free Western Minnesota separate from the United States? What do you think would happen? Those people would be annihilated, okay? And there would be probably a lot of innocent victims, and the United States would make no apologies to that. They would annihilate the problem, whatever the cost would be, right? That's the U.S. way. That's the American way. Don't like it? Don't start a fight. Right? Don't start a fight with a power that can just decimate you. It's not worth it. If you start a fight with somebody who can destroy you, well, you're asking for problems. And when they do destroy you, you don't really have a choice at that point, and you don't really have any justification to come crying and say, oh no, they're hurting us, they're being unfair. No, you started the fight, you got your butt whooped. Learn your lesson. Don't do it again. Change your ways. Stop doing that. And oh, by the way, the group that started to do that cannot exist anymore, because that's not acceptable. Because we can't just keep having people running around destroying everything just because they feel like being destroyers of everything. That's not a thing. We can't just allow that. Anyway, that's my 2 cents about it, really. Kind of told you what I think. I'd love to know what you think. Leave a comment below. Amazing. So what are we talking about? What's happening with the situation in Gaza with the 200 terrorists who are stuck in the tunnels? Hello. You just got here. Yeah, no, I'm talking about the 200 Hamas terrorists who are stuck in a tunnel in Gaza on the side that Israel controls. They've been pleading for their life. The Israeli Prime Minister has said that they will not be spared because, well, they're Hamas terrorists. And showing them mercy is not going to result in them being more merciful now or in the future. Right? That is well established. We have shown them mercy plenty of times and gotten nothing but violence in return. We released over 1,000 Hamas terrorists from prison in exchange for Gilad Shalit in 2011. And what did we get in return? Yahya Sinwar, one of those 1,000 people released from prison who got brain surgery for free in Israel that saved his life. Right? He got surgery to remove cancers from him from Israel. They saved his life. That guy, Yahya Sinwar, what did he do? When he was released, he went back to Gaza. He went on to become an even bloodier leader of Hamas and became the leader of the terrorist organization in Gaza, of the military wing, that they call it, of Gaza's Hamas. And then he architected and launched the October 7th attacks against Israel and led the war against Israel until he was caught and killed. Cornered, dressed like a woman, and eliminated by a drone. If you haven't seen that video, you really should go look at it, because it is quite telling. There's videos of him in the days before, like in some random buildings in Gaza, walking around in a niqab or whatever, a big ass hijab covering practically everything except his face in that particular instance. But much of the time his face was hidden. He was literally walking around dressed like a woman. The brave Muslim fighter that he was, right? Hiding as a woman. And then he was eventually caught almost by accident, by a group of relatively new soldiers, actually. It's a little known fact. He wasn't, ensnared by, Israel's version of the SEAL Team 6 or something like that. No, he was actually caught by a group of pretty regular infantry soldiers who were just, out of training and recently deployed to Gaza, undergoing some, local field training, but in active duty mode, in combat mode. And he ran across them. They noticed him. And when he refused to surrender, the battle ensued, and well, battle. The hunt went on, and he was cornered and eventually eliminated by drones. So, pretty interesting story, if you ask me. At the same time, shows you just what a brave and heroic man he was, right? That he not only used the opportunity of being free to continue attacking the very people that had literally saved his life. In fact, one of the people murdered on October 7th was a child of one of the doctors that actually saved his life. Yeah? To show you how small this whole region is and how personal it is for all of us. Yeah, that's why it's a very messed up situation in that way. In the sense of, like, this is a small region of the world. And what happens here a lot doesn't just affect people that you've heard of. It very often affects people you literally know relation away, maybe two. Right? This whole 6 degrees of separation thing, yeah, it is very true. You are usually not more than 6 degrees of separation from pretty much anyone on the planet, as crazy as that sounds. You might think, well, how am I connected to anybody on the other side of the world from me? You'd be surprised. But here, when you're in such a small country where everyone's so connected, it's usually even closer. It's like 1 or 2 degrees away, or at most 3 in most cases. Yeah, so it's messed up. It's messed up for sure. What's happened? Anyway, that is the proverbial long and short of it. And for now, it's kind of going to wrap it up here. So, okay, well, thank you for your compliments, people. By all means, like and comment and subscribe and share and all that stuff. Hit the bell notification so that you get my message when I post a new video. That's always good. And hopefully that will help you be informed about when I'm putting stuff out here. Anyway, that's going to do for now. I wish you all the very best. And until next time, folks. Peace. Shalom.